Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us today on World EV Day. It's a pleasure to have you all. And here, as we discuss an important topic that is shaping the future of our transport system, the evolution of electric vehicles and the road ahead for India. EVs are not just about clean energy transportation, they are also about innovation, energy independence, and sustainable future. I'll just put one statistics like $120 billion worth of oil that is imported in India, and 90% of which is consumed in transportation sector. Now, for a nation to become energy independent, sustainable electrification of transport looks to be a proven strategy. So today, in this webinar, we will be exploring the global journey of EVs, learn from international success stories, and discuss how India is going to carve or is carving its own path forward. So, dear participants, this session will last for 90 minutes, and we have with us a panel of some of well-known stalwarts of India, academia, and policymakers, who actually bring diverse perspective from global policy, industry leadership, regulatory frameworks, and technological innovation. My name is Sumedh Agarwal, and I'm the director at AEEE, and I'll be moderating the session for you. And I'm pleased to welcome Nitish Arora, who currently leads the Clean Mobility Vertical at National Research Defense Council, NRDC India, and has served as an advisor to government agencies for supporting in mainstreaming of electric mobility in India. Nitish has led strategic alliances, mergers and acquisition for prominent entities such as Hero Motocorp, Ola Electric, and Lithium Urban Technologies. We have with us Edmund Downie. He's a researcher at Princeton University School of Public and International Affairs and specializes in global energy policy and EV evolution. He also has been a Marshall Scholar from University of Oxford. Welcome, Nitish and Edmund, in this webinar. Next, we have Jyoti Harichandan, founder of Bolt Earth, an innovator in EV charging infrastructure space, building technology solutions for smoother transition to electric vehicles. We have with us Mayank, Director Regulatory at Nange Anderson India Private Limited, who comes with a strong background in India EV regulatory space and also business advisory engagements working for Big Four consulting firms. Last but not the least, I also have Neha with me, Head of Electric Vehicles and Innovation System at MG Motors India, leading one of the foremost automotive companies in India EV space. Thank you so much, Nitish, Edmund, Jyoti, Mayank, and Neha for joining and making this webinar possible. We are equally excited to have you all with us, and dear participants, now let's begin the webinar. So our webinar is actually divided into 4-5 segments. We will take each segment one by one, and then we'll try to learn more from our expert speakers, expert panelists, how they have in their own area experienced the evolution and what kind of next steps we are planning to take forward. So let me begin with the session with a segment that delve into the historical evolution of EV globally and discuss lessons that India can learn from other countries. So my first question is to you, Edmund. Edmund, you have worked significantly on EV bus transit in China and US. Could you please share your insights with our esteemed participants on some significant breakthroughs that has happened in the industry?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Sumedh, and to join this great panel. I think that the EV story is really one of pretty dramatic transformation over the past decade or so, even longer, that's put us in a position where we are now to start catalyzing really large scale adoption. One that's really been heavily driven by good policy, a policy driven market that creates an industrial ecosystem, as well as creates the opportunity for demand that is in the bus space in particular. So in the early days, it was particularly important in China. So to go back, by the way, China, 96% of all EV buses in the world are currently in China right now. The whole national fleet is about 65% electric. It's bus fleet. So China is really the leader in this space, much more than the US, I'll say. And, despite my familiarity with both. And in China, really, that reflects good policy that created strong demand from the start, as well as more recently, continued support for financing, in particular, for public transit purchasers to find innovative models in order to make it possible to purchase EV buses because they can be quite expensive up front. And so that's the sort of basic kind of two prongs you need. One, good policy to support manufacturing to emerge, and second, good policy to help your public transit purchasers, or in India's case, your private companies, to be able to purchase EV buses.
Perfect. So, Edmund, a follow-up question to you: that what are the interventions that we can actually emulate from China? Because you have worked a lot in China market, EV transit bus market. So, any suggestions you can propose that can be emulated? Although the economies are different, the way of working is different, but still you see some parallel things which can definitely be taken forward.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I'll mention two things. One of which I think India is already doing and is already on a good path towards. The second of which India is already also doing to an extent, but there are some new measures that maybe we can learn from China to bring in. So the first area is, I think, the importance of a strong indigenous and competitive manufacturing space. So within China right now, if you look at market shares of EV bus manufacturers, the largest single EV bus manufacturer has about 30% market share. The rest of them, there are a number of different firms that all have less than 10% or so market share. Now, long term, there will be consolidation in that sector over time, but what I think it demonstrates is the value for purchasers of having a lot of different options that can drive innovation in the sector. India right now has a somewhat more concentrated EV bus market. Tata Motors was about 50% market share, but there are a number of new entrants that are joining in. Electra Green Tech is already there, and a couple other companies. And new companies that are also building factories. So I think there's going to be more competition in this space going forward, and that's going to be good for procurers of these buses. The second aspect, I think, is something where there's some area for improvement, which is in the strategy for supporting procurement. India has developed one of the biggest challenges with adoption of EV buses is that they're quite expensive. They're pretty capital intensive. They can be different ranges of estimates, but up to 2 to 4 times perhaps in upfront capital costs. You'll save on the lifetime costs because you don't have to buy all the fuel that Sumit mentioned. So the challenge, of course, is that many road transportation undertakings don't necessarily have the financing, or private companies, as the Indian bus market is pretty private heavy. About 93% of all coaches actually are private companies, don't necessarily have the capital resources to be able to afford those. There have been some very clever models developed for that, gross cost contracting in particular, so far. That is leasing approaches that make it possible for capital constrained operators to acquire EV buses. But I think to expand things further, there's a procurement model of having intermediaries to buy buses from original equipment manufacturers and then lease them to operators that has been done within China in the city of Shenzhen, one of the earliest electrifiers. I think would be a great approach to bring in India. And this is something that's been proposed already by folks at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis as well. It's a way to get those capital assets off the manufacturer's books, take them out of the hands of manufacturers who don't want to be operators of those buses long term, while also still addressing the capital constraints through a leasing model that private operators as well as capital-constrained road transit undertakings have. So, different approaches for that. But I think that establishing a central, a union public sector undertaking, a PSU from the union government, a bit like the Indian Railway Finance Corporation for EV buses, would be an excellent step for India.
Great points, Edmund. Thank you so much. I think I'll bring Neha here. Good afternoon, Neha. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you. Thank you so much, Sumer, and thank you for inviting me to be part of this esteemed panel. Really excited to be here and wishing everybody a very happy World EV Day.
Great. Thank you so much, Neha, for joining us. And Neha, given your experience with MG Motors, what lessons do you think India can learn from countries that have successfully adopted EVs? I mean, there has been a greater penetration in other countries compared to EVs. So I would like to hear more from you. Any specific strategies that you consider could help us in scaling and implementing things faster?
Sure, Sumit. So I think when it comes to India market has always been very unique, and we are at a very interesting, I would say, juncture at where we are seeing now, a lot of positive, I would say, traction towards electric vehicles. In the last few years also we see that there has been a lot of, I would say, uh, advancements in a lot of frameworks, be it related to infrastructure development, be it related to electric vehicles, I would say product offerings itself in the market, be it related to skill, a lot of policy, and we have seen also a lot of policy interventions as well from the government, which is actually again helping to boost the confidence. Coming up a lot of players, both locally and globally, to create and build infrastructure in the entire ecosystem in the country. Basically, that is helping the customers with more and more choices, and I would say increase confidence towards adopting electric vehicles. Currently, obviously, there when you see percentage-wise, we are seeing obviously a larger growth, or I would say larger numbers in two-wheeler and three-wheeler, but in electric vehicle four-wheeler segment also, there has been a lot of, I would say, growth year on year when we see, and that shows, in fact, a very good picture. At MG itself, also, we believe that electric vehicles itself are not only product, right? They are the lifestyle itself, because when you buy an EV, there are a lot of things that you see which are new, right from your habits of fueling your car to, in fact, how you want to plan your, say, for example, long distance travels, etc. So when it comes to electric vehicle, it is the entire ecosystem that comes into picture. And since day one, even before the launch of the first car in the market, our endeavor has been how to create this robust EV ecosystem. So, under this vision, we have been fostering partnerships with not only, I would say, Indian, but global companies as well. We are developing what we call as a six-step charging solution, which basically gives a new, or I would say, a unique solution for different kind of charging needs, be it home charging, public charging, community charging, highway charging. We are also creating a lot of, I would say, initiatives on increasing the EV education and awareness. So, because it's a new category, there are also a lot of myths in the mind of, stakeholders. So, how we can bust that myth, bring the right, I would say, information. So, working towards awareness and education, and also building the infrastructure together. And needless to say, it is also supported by bringing, I would say, the world class products in the market as well. So as MG, we have already launched two cars, one which is ZSEV, which is the first internet electric SUV, which was launched in 2020. The second was Comet, again a very unique and I would say a very special urban mobility solution. We call it, because it's ideal for your city travels and also for your daily travel. And the third, which we are very excited about, and which is going to be launched soon in Indian market, which is Windsor EV. So this is how we are working, and we look forward to working with more and more players in the segment, so that we can create and build this EV ecosystem together.
Great. I think my best wishes, first of all, Neha, for all your launches as well as sales. And I guess you have given a great segue for me to take up my next question, that is towards Nitish. So Nitish, thank you so much. I welcome you to this webinar, and I'm glad that you made it today.
Thank you so much, Sumit, for having me here. Really, really great to be part of this panel. Yeah, looking forward.
Thank you. So Nitish, my question is that, like EV policies in many states in India are nearing to its, first term completion. Uh, Neha already mentioned that there is a scaling happening, but to cross the tipping point, what are your views? Because you have a great experience as a policymaker, and you have experiences of NRDC deploying them in US. So if you can share those insights with our dear participants, and we have 64 people who are waiting to hear from you. So over to you, Nitish, to learn more from you.
Thank you so much, Sumit. Thank you so much. So I think I agree with Neha as well. I think over the past few years, uh, India has made some phenomenal progress when it comes to EV initiatives. Um, Government has been on the top in terms of the policymakers, in terms of offering the demand side incentives, being both at the federal and at the subnational level, then your PLI schemes to boost up the local supply side manufacturing, EV charging standards, incentives for setting up EV charging infrastructure, and much more, right? But uh, if we look at the EV penetration percentage, it's still about 6.3, 6.4%, which means that the demand side policy initiatives alone are not sufficient for us to help us nudge to cross the tipping point. And one needs to step up the game on the supply side. The reason I emphasize so that one of the reasons for sluggish adoption of EV has been the high upfront cost of EVs, the paucity of charging infrastructure, and much more. Right now, if we have to solve for this, you need to really step up the game on the supply side. By this, I mean that globally there has been a mix of both regulatory and market-based instruments on the supply side to nudge the ecosystem to cater to increase supply, and by which I mean there has been supply side regulations such as clear phasing out of ICE vehicles, um, setting up ZEV production and sales targets, setting up new efficiency fuel emission standards, and much more, right? And integrating the entire EV ecosystem into the gamut of carbon markets, ESG frameworks, which ultimately solidify the OEM strategy and helps them, give them a clear market signal as to where they put in their dollars, right? And helps push the supply side ahead. So in this context, what we have seen both in US and globally, that the supply side regulations have been really played an important role. So we talk about as of 2023, 99% of zero emission vehicle sales comes from markets which either have a zero emission, a supply side target or a mandate, right? And if you look at some of, in terms of how effective have these been supply side regulations in driving these EV adoption and helping some of the countries really reach closer to the tipping point. You can take examples like the uh, carbon CO2 emission standards in EU. When the second phase was implemented in 2019, the battery electric vehicle market share was about 3%, and in 2019, and when the emission standards came into place, it increased from 3 to 19% in 2021. And same is with the Chinese new energy vehicle requirements, phase 1 and phase 2. So it ramped up the electric vehicle penetration market by 5%, from 5% to 26%. And a good a counterfactual has also can be observed in, I think, the way the US operated. So California has been often regarded as one of the leaders when it comes of the supply side regulations. So when these regulations were brought in, California saw a steep peak in terms of the new electric vehicle sales. But at the time in 2018, when there were fear that the Trump administration has rolled back some of the California ZEV regulations and weakened the emission standards nationally, these sales halted for almost 3 years. And in 2021, when the emission standards were again brought in place. The sales again skyrocketed. And I think the best part that I think what I would also like to echo here is uh, the supply side regulations are more easier to monitor unless your domestic demand side or fiscal policies. We see in the case with FAME 1 and FAME 2, the government has to nudge really around in getting the right kind of a data, whom to subsidize, when to pass the money, and how to pass them. And so that's whole administrative process was much more complex and with limited visibility. So I think as Indian states now are rethinking as what's going to be the next phase of their EV policies, one is they need to think of have some of these supply side regulations, but also complement it with the demand side regulations like the fleet electrification roadmap, the initiatives in Delhi, where the Delhi aggregator policy was brought in just to boost the industry and give them a clear runway that in the near term that this would be this much demand that can help industry plan in their investments and so on and so forth. But also from a perspective that so far, even the state policies when it comes to fiscal incentives are focused only on giving it to vehicle purchase level. Now those initiatives could be repurposed and repackaged to lay a more emphasis on EV charging infrastructure per se, because that has more broadened social benefits instead of just few people who buy the EV from that money, and ultimately it's the taxpayers' money, right? So I think from that perspective, I say that a crucial blend of both supply and demand side regulations could be the key for Indian states, but with a due recognition on how you ensure that the clean mobility transition is equitable and inclusive. So you are really helping those ones who cannot by the market forces can really transition. So your interventions are really targeted to serve those categories. So yeah.
So that's a valid point, Nitesh. I do agree and echo that. The point you mentioned about equitability and inclusiveness, I guess that brings me into a question which I will ask you later. But I guess because you have already covered about significantly about regulations, now is my time to actually have the specialist of regulations in place. Like Mayank is with us, and thank you so much, Mayank, once again for joining the webinar. So Mayank, I'll just take a step back, and if you can, because we have good amount of participants who perhaps would also be interested to learn about the regulatory space, how the central and state policies are there, what kind of impact are they creating, and what has to be done, because now recently an EV policy came in 2024. So if you can just throw some light where we should go ahead and how should we make it more enabling, I guess that is what everyone would be happy to hear as well. Yeah. So what do you think?
Thank you, Sumit. Thank you, everyone. Now, just to, typically, if you look at Indian regulations, right, the perception is that the regulators are always a step behind. Just look at the IT revolution that happened in the 90s and early 2000s, right? The IT industry was always a couple of steps ahead of the regulations, right? The government said we are trying to incentivize the IT players, but I don't think Infosys, Wipro, by the time they reached the scale and the incentives and other kind of enabling features came in, those are already, they were already running ahead. That is not the case, or does not seem to be the case with the way, the government is dealing with EVs and also, basically with those targets of reducing carbon emissions, right? So they are having, I mean, from what we see, there seems to be a coordinated approach between multiple ministries, which includes the Ministry of Heavy Industries, like you mentioned, that's the core ministry, which takes care of the EV policies, and also FAME 2, like Ritesh mentioned, and FAME 3, which is in the works right now. That is again on the demand side, but also on the supply side, rather than just, kind of incentivizing or, giving people the tools or money on the and cover the entire EV manufacturing ecosystem in India. like Edmund was also mentioning, that there are the key feature that he has seen, the difference between China and India. If we have to increase penetration, it's very important to have that manufacturing set up, the entire ecosystem in India, because otherwise, what will happen is we are anyways dependent on oil imports right now, correct? So we'll move from being dependent on some countries for oil imports, we may move to being dependent on, let's say, lithium cells from some other country, right? Having that ecosystem and that understanding, the government has come out with the with the bouquet of schemes, right? One you just mentioned, electronic mobility promotion scheme, that is there. FAME 2 is already there. PLI schemes we've seen, there are specific PLI schemes, one specifically focused on auto and auto components, right? There is also one on cell manufacturing, advanced chemistry cell manufacturing, that is specifically focused on lithium ion cells, because there are a lot of battery packs that anyways are getting manufactured in India along with BMS, but the cells are imported. So they're focusing on that. There's a 50 gigawatt hour capacity bid that is already on, out of which 40 gigawatt hour has already been allocated. So we have to see how that those kind of manufacturing facilities ramp up and are going to help achieve those targets of EV adoption. Also, one more thing that the government has focused on is on semiconductors, because that is one thing, as we move forward with EVs and even with conventional vehicles, the focus on the value of electronics in vehicles is anyways increasing, and a major component of that is because of semiconductors. So we've already got about 4 plants manufacturing semiconductors under incentive schemes that have already been set up. So that is something that is going to be very, very important. One more important point is, regulations also go in hand with taxes. So if you look at the taxation system, the traditional auto manufacturing in India has benefited a lot in the past as well through some tax interventions, basically import tariffs. Now what we've seen is in electronics and other segments, there have been what they term as phased manufacturing program, where a certain components are taxed progressively, or their taxes are reduced progressively to give time for the Indian industry to kind of scale up and be competitive in the EV space. So this is another thing that we are seeing happening in this EV space. There are certain experimental projects as well, like NHEVs, which is basically focusing on highways that are dedicated for EV. So those are things that are happening at a smaller scale. And also looking at certain things like M2M communication from a telecom regulatory side. So that is also something that is happening. So the point of mentioning or listing down all these was not just to list them, but the fact that the government, is focused on this sector, and not only this, the EV manufacturing sector, the focus is basically on reduction on carbon emissions. So that is the core focus that we have seen both at MHI, along with METI, and even the Ministry of Petroleum and Natural Gas. So all these 3 ministries are kind of coordinating. It seems we don't know was happening behind the government corridors, but we do know, based on the policies that have been rolled out, that there is some kind of coordination, and that's why we see a consolidated approach.
So that makes sense. I fully agree. I mean, taxation system and other points which you highlighted, actually, those are kind of enablers which definitely take us forward. I wanted to go to Jyoti, but I think what you said actually sparked me to ask one question to Neha. And this is because she comes from that industry background. So Neha, I mean, what exactly are the policies you see would become more conducive, and what exactly is MG's point of view on how things should evolve? Maybe that will definitely help us to close the segment two that is on the regulatory piece.
So, to start with, I would definitely say, Sumit, that the kind of policy interventions that we are seeing, are very encouraging, both at a central and a state level. Not only related to manufacturing, and like, for example, we have seen examples of policies to expand manufacturing, to localize, again, PLI scheme we have seen. But I would specifically like to talk from a customer perspective. A lot of demand-led incentives are also pushing customers to buy and increase the offtake of EVs. For example, a lot of states these days are offering, incentives for purchase of electric vehicles. There is an electric tariff, EV tariff, which basically again is a subsidized rate offered by many states when you are using electricity for setting up the charging station or for charging your car or vehicle itself, right? So I again there are a lot of states which are offer zero RTO or road tax here. So all of this helps to encourage, and in fact I would say reduce the upfront cost itself, and also to encourage customers to go for EVs in different segments. So I think from a customer perspective, these interventions are really helpful and encouraging.
Thank you so much, Neha. That was useful. So I guess I now want to move to another segment, and that is a very interesting segment. That is the challenges in the Indian context. I mean, I heard somewhere a very good phrase that India is a place of mouth-watering opportunities and eye-watering challenges. So just wanted to bring Jyoti Ranjan here. Jyoti, thank you so much for joining this. Can you hear me properly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. So Jyoti, I mean, affordability and infrastructure are often, cited as significant barriers in India. It's always kind of a chicken and egg situation. I mean, we say that charging infrastructure is not getting established because EV sales are not happening, and EV sales are not happening because of its charging infrastructure is not getting established. So, you have been an entrepreneur, and I'm really, I admire that you know what kind of ground challenges are there and what are the major gaps in India EV infrastructure, if you can just throw some light on them. And also the second part is how to address them effectively. So floor is all yours, Jyoti. Go ahead, please.
Okay, thank you, Sumit, for basically inviting me, and thanks team for organizing this, and the panelist for basically throwing lights on different aspects of and challenges of EV adoption in India. I think basically the EV charging infrastructure at current basically place is a chicken and egg problem, like you correctly said. There is EV adoption problem, and there is utilization risk also, which is associated with deploying the charging points. But I'm glad to say that we have figured out some ways in which basically we can grow and grow kind of profitably now, essentially, in terms of where we are. We should be reaching profitability in a few quarters to a year, and have figured out a way which scales actually based on the country's needs. So one of the things which we want to highlight here is basically I think Nitish pointed out that the EV adoption is at 6%, 7%. That is mainly in the two-wheelers. And in fact, in three-wheelers, it's close to 25%, right? So here is a question, essentially, though the government has been kind of looking at the EV adoption problem from the ecosystem point of view, but most of the subsidies today are directed towards fast charging of cars, essentially, and only can be availed by the PSU companies, right? So that means that most of the EVs today do not have any kind of subsidy for charging, essentially. So we have deployed a network of 35,000 plus for these two and three wheeler basically vehicles, as well as four wheelers now. But mainly two and three wheeler where we are focusing on from the early days, because we understood that the EV adoption in India will be very different than the West or even in China. In China, the two wheeler to four wheeler ratio is 1:1. In India, you can guess what it is. It is about 8 to 10:1, right? And as per the survey of 2021 by Ministry of Power, about 70% of energy, the fuel, which are used in two and three wheelers, and they are the most polluting, essentially, right? So the having kind of pointed at the charging today has been a lot to the vehicles which are non-existent on road, and that's where a lot of the CPOs and charging infrastructure come. basically see there is a low utilization and other things today, right? And secondly, our belief is that if India needs to basically have go EV in the next, let's say, 10 years or 15 years, considering the current vehicle population of about 200 to 240 million vehicles in terms of two-wheeler, three-wheeler, four-wheeler, all combined, we would need a similar amount of charging points also. But majority of them would be like slow charging points, which will be about 90-95%. This is the same thing which has happened in China also. You look at their EV adoption rates. Most of the real estate places already have charging points, whether you have your apartment, your basically offices, or any kind of place where you can park would most likely have a charging point. That is what kind of encourages EV users to kind of go over the edge. If you ask today in two and three wheeler, everybody is already considering buying a EV because there is already price parity at least, right? But the only reason a lot of them are not switching over is because they are like, okay, where will I charge? I stay in apartment. I work in a multinational which has a corporate office. I can't see a place where I can charge. So if you put it right in front of them, they will definitely basically in terms. So part is in these charging points, you can basically there is already a financial viability model in which you can break even in very less time compared to the parking and compared to the highway chargers. And you don't need a lot of capex to be deployed to basically build this. In fact, you need policy nudges like some of these states and cities have now started mandating that you need 20% parking have EV charging points. So those are some of the things which are in the right direction. But of course, a lot needs to be done so that people can see this and can get basically be pushed over the edge to buy that EV. Because right now, at least on the two and three wheeler front, I don't think people have the challenge of basically cost, because the cost is almost there. In fact, in some OEMs and some makes and models, it's cheaper than a gasoline vehicle, right? So I think the market has moved in that direction, at least to some point. And the aim is now to kind of put this in front of people so they are confident enough to go and purchase that EV in the festive season. And we are already doing it. And I'm sure, I think Neha from MG would be seeing these uptrend in societies where the vehicle ownership has gone up, I think 5 to 10x in the last 1 to 2 years since we have started deploying these charging points. Like we track these usage patterns and stuff, and like the EV adoption has gone up like about 5 to 10 times in most of the apartments, in most of the offices since we have deployed there. And we are currently breaking even very shortly, essentially, in these assets which we have deployed also.
Great. Thanks, Jyoti. I guess that's a very valid point. I just was thinking that suppose if we think about any segment where the charging infrastructure should be prioritized, then what that segment could be, or it is like you have to target all the segments all at once. So what is your take on that?
Sorry, Sumit,
I think there's some network issue.
Repeat the question, please.
Yeah, I was just trying to ask is that suppose if we have to prioritize a segment where the charging infrastructure should be deployed ASAP, that is a two-wheeler, three-wheeler, or should it be a strategy where everything has to be taken together as a one whole and the deployment should happen? So if I ask you that question, then what would be your response to that?
So, okay. So I think basically we are making our voices also heard on various comment forums as well on this. That basically we should focus on the two and three wheelers or public transport, essentially vehicles as a basically starting point, because this is where it impacts the most number of people essentially. If you look at the expense which the government is making versus how many people are actually getting impacted by that, I think two, three wheelers and public networks are where I would say the momentum should shift. There has been a lot of deployments on the four-wheeler. I think that will continue over time. But I think on the two and three-wheeler and buses side, it is under deployed essentially, or under invested, if you ask me today, right? Based on the EV adoption rates and stuff, as well as the other side of the thing, which is basically making regulatory tweaks in the property or building codes so that you can enable these basically upcoming houses. At least the old ones have to be retrofitted, but the upcoming houses or upcoming projects need to be EV. Just like you have certifications of IGBC and others, it should be made a mandate that are they using solar, are they giving wastewater treatment, and are they giving EV charging points essentially in their amenities essentially, right? So you can make those mandates, and in certain cities, the government, at least the tighter ones like Bangalore, Mumbai, Pune, Hyderabad, all the usual suspects, at least there has to be mandate starting in the next few years, because otherwise it's going to be difficult for basically consumers to start or depend on this infrastructure. Because what we are seeing in some apartments where we have deployed chargers are that there are new queues forming up, right? And basically since there is no mandate or anything, and we deployed it in the early days in our own balance sheet, so they don't want to fund it. So the thing is, there has to be mandates, because for 3, 10, 20 vehicles I can still deploy. I can't deploy for 100 or a 1000 vehicle in a 1000 apartment to have that kind of deployment, and it has to be done, and all the real estate also has to be retrofitted along with the grid connections, right? So those are some of the things which we have to kind of look at and sort out and iron out some of these policies. So option.
Okay. No, I guess point well taken, Jyoti. I think the next way we should go is that EV infrastructure should get the same recognition as water, gas, or other utilities get. So perhaps that will definitely be a game changer if I consider Indian context. So I move to my next segment, and that is more related to consumers and financing. Thank you, Jyoti, once again. And I just want to bring in Ned again. So, Edmund, I wanted to learn from you that financing is always a big challenge. I mean, what are your how China enabled EV financing? If you can just throw some light upon that, that will really be useful for our audience as well.
Absolutely, yeah. I'll distinguish here the transit bus market and the consumer market. So in the consumer side, really China's story is in a lot of ways actually about developing such a strong supply side infrastructure that the financing no longer was necessarily as much of an issue. EVs in China are increasingly, even in the four-wheeler segment, the cheapest option even up front, and that's a reflection of the aggressive investments and support and competitive infrastructure that's been built up in that sector. There certainly were sort of certain kinds of demand-side incentives that were adopted. Different stages, much easier to get a license plate, get your vehicle registered, usually if you're buying an EV, and in certain cities, there are odd even rationing policies, a bit like what Delhi has done. Those are much more widespread within China, and they tend to be more favorable towards EVs. But at this stage, EVs are often the cheapest option upfront, and maybe in some cases the only way to get a license plate. In the transit bus sector, though, the financing challenge is very acute. And I think, for some of the reasons that I mentioned earlier, capex costs up front can be 2 to 4 times what the cost of direct purchase can be. Some good measures already by the Indian government in terms of its bulk procurement approach, using a single company, CESL, as the procurer for all EV bus tenders around the country, as well as leasing models that have been used. But I think this goes back to this idea of a establishing a union PSU that can handle some of these capital cost challenges on behalf of both the manufacturers and the road transport undertakings. So what happens right now is one of the constraints is that even using this leasing model, basically, where the standard procurement model is gross cost contracts, where the road transport undertakings, the state-owned road transport undertakings, lease from the original equipment manufacturers directly, there can still be challenges in these players who have generally limited working capital availability in making their payments consistently on time. A payment security mechanism has been established in partnership with the U.S. That should cover about 40,000 provide payment security for OEMs for about 40,000 buses, up to about 40,000 buses. But given India's goals of going to 800,000 bus replacements over the next 7 years, we need bigger scope. Moreover, the OEMs themselves, as part of these current contracts, are actually operating the assets as well as owning the assets. And that's probably not long-term where they want to be positioned for growing the manufacturing sector. It'd be good to be able to get those players out of it. And so I think in cities that have experience already with EV buses integrated into their fleets, who've already gotten involved in this sector, I think you want to transition to a model where you're continuing the leasing approach, but instead of leasing it from the OEM themselves and having the OEM be the operator of the asset, move the operations into the state road transport undertaking and continue leasing from a union PSU that has purchased from the OEMs. And that way, that frees up the working capital on the OEM's balance sheet to continue investing and strengthening their manufacturing, while continuing to address the capital cost constraints, and taking advantage of stronger balance sheets within the center to help address some of those weaknesses at the state level.
Great, that was useful. So, I mean, another question which I had, and that was for Neha. I mean, Neha, if you can also share any strategic initiatives you have considered for making EV financing more accessible to consumers. So I think that also would be really helpful for our participants to know.
Sure. So, when it comes to the commercials related to EV, Sumit, I mean, obviously financing is one option, but I want to also highlight one point on the economics on the ownership. So, when we look at a total cost of ownership for electric vehicles, there are 2-3 things that stands out and makes EV, I would say, a very efficient purchase for a long run. For example, when it comes to the running cost, right? We have seen that for an average 4-wheeler, the running cost of EV is less than a rupee for which makes it really efficient. And while the upfront cost or the buying cost may be higher at the time, but the running cost makes the overall cost of ownership at par with the ICE segment. Secondly, when it comes to maintenance also. So in terms of maintenance, again, with fewer parts, with lesser maintenance required, the overall cost of maintenance also becomes cheaper. So putting together running cost and maintenance cost again makes the total cost of ownership package much cheaper for the end customer. Now, when it comes to financing, obviously, we all know that battery is one of the bigger cost when it comes to electric vehicle. But the good part is we have seen the cost of battery also reducing over the last few years, which is making the entry point of the electric vehicles, I would say, lower with every subsequent new launch that we see in the market. Secondly, I think from a financing perspective or resale, I think resale also plays a very important role, because the EV market is niche and there's a lot of questions that comes in respect of resale. So we have few programs also which we have launched with the previous car launches. For example, there's a reassure buyback program, for example. Then there is a program called Shield, which basically provides you 5 years warranty on the car, then your 5-year services, and like that, which makes the total overall cost of ownership cheaper. And obviously, when it comes to because these are the things which are really, I would say, advantageous for the retail customers. when it comes to bulk purchase or the fleet, then there are a lot of organizations now who are coming in the space of EV financing and supporting in bringing the overall cost of ownership lower.
Great. No, thank you so much, Edmund and Neha, for sharing those perspectives and insights. I think I will conclude by my last question, and that is for Nitish. Nitish, if one is the financing side, we've heard about regulatory, we have heard about challenges, but I guess you are the right person to focus on the consumer side. I mean, what consumer perceptions do you think are unique in India, and how they impact the EV market here? So I think if you can throw some light on that, it would be really helpful.
Sure. Thanks, Sumit. So I think so far both the federal and then subnational EV policies in India have focused on developing, I would say, lighthouse cities when it comes to developing EV penetration and so on and so forth. But there are certain cases which are very unique to India. For instance, as we talk about this clean mobility transition, 65% of India's population live in 6 lakh plus Indian villages. So how do you ensure that from an equity and inclusivity perspective, that they are a part of this clean mobility transition? Because we do not really want that the old polluting vehicles from the cities start getting dumped into the rural backyards, and then you have a different problem to solve. It's just the focus of the problem or the areas of the problem shifts. So I think so it's very critical to look as how the strategies which can help us to make this mobility transition more inclusive. So for instance, if you look at the two-wheeler market, two-wheeler has been the predominant mode of transport in the rural areas, with 55% of India's 17 million two-wheelers getting sold in the rural market. But we have hardly seen any kind of direct policy intervention because being directed for the rural market. And this is with, I'd also like to share with the larger ecosystem that we at NRDC collaborated with Self-Help Employed Women Association and SIDBI to possibly structure country's first risk-sharing facility for financing of EVs with first loss guarantee programs that also builds OEMs' confidence when it comes to the rural market. And with this, we have launched, I think, the country's first e-mobility program earlier this year. Since then, we have made some good progress. I think onboarded TVS, Ather Energy, and NBFCs like Refin, AMU, and so on and so forth. But I think the point here is to highlight that these Indian use cases have a larger potential. For example, if we look at countries in global south, right? I mean, when you also talk about clean mobility transition in African nations and so on and so forth, India can play a role of a big brother in terms of fostering those South-South cooperation, in terms of ways these clean mobility transition can be more inclusive. And I think another form factor that I'd just like to spend 60 seconds more is on the tractor side. Tractors is another segment which consumes about 7.4% of India's diesel, almost similar to India's bus fleet, but there is hardly any talks about electrifying tractors at a time when the PM 2.5 and NOx emissions from tractors have increased by 80% and 150% respectively in the last 15 years or so. So although the government, under its farm mechanization policies, both at the federal and subnational level, subsidizes the purchase of ICE tractors, but there isn't any due recognition of how do you incentivize and make policies more inclusive by ensuring that electric tractors are being prioritized and so on and so forth. So I think on a policy landscape, there is a need to shift in. There is a need for a shift in focus. So demand incentives should continue in the near term, but there should be demarcated budgets for the rural areas, in the sense that earlier the budgets that have been demarcated for fiscal incentives, the prime beneficiaries of that has been in the urban centric cities or the lighthouse cities, and that beneficiaries have not really reached someone at the bottom of the pyramid. So how do you ensure that there are some dedicated policies marked for those vulnerable or marginalized groups, so that they feel also part of and take ownership of this clean mobility transition and become those ambassadors for us to drive that change.
Great, some great points, Nitish. I agree that, like you mentioned about innovation in risk sharing mechanism. You also mentioned about bringing women in the center stage, recognition to the agrarian economy which we have in India, and how we can make those innovations when it comes to tractors. I think all are really valid points and perhaps pretty unique to India perspective. So thank you, Nitish, for bringing them out. And I think that brings me to the penultimate segment on innovation part. So Mayank, I just wanted to put spotlight on you and also wanted to discuss what kind of how do you foresee the role of innovation in overcoming the barriers in the EV adoption in India, and any upcoming trends and technologies that excites you apart from the regulatory deal that you deal with?
No, absolutely. Thanks for that question. In fact, just before the call started, in fact, while we are on this call, there's a separate meeting going on with the Automobile Component Manufacturers Association, ACMA. They're also celebrating World EV Day today. And although they are traditional guys, they're traditional auto component manufacturers, they're also, like I was there, a couple of hours back, and their focus was also very much on how we can innovate. In fact, Minister for Road Transportation, Mr. Nitin Gadkari, and the Minister for Heavy Industries, Mr. Kumaraswamy, was there, and there, they were hinting at how we can increase R&D, right, research and development, and especially with respect to EVs on the battery side, right. So there are a couple of points where they were focused on. One was the existing lithium-ion technology that we have. How can we either, of course, based on innovation, are there alternative materials that we can use for enhancing the battery? Because the fact is, one is the battery density, and the charge cycles. These are the two key, kind of parameters or matrices based on which the battery quality is kind of judged. And that's how, the BIS standards, etc., are also being made here. So there also the focus was how can we increase density, increase the life, the cycle count of the batteries on the existing technology. Are there newer technologies wherein we can collaborate with the industry? And that's where the whole public-private partnership aspect of it also comes in, because we've seen in multiple cases of such high technology products, the government has created funds wherein they are willing to put in certain equity as well upfront, so that they can participate with the industry and develop such technologies. So one is on alternative lithium cells. It could be lithium ion or sodium ion, basically depending on how the technology proceeds, and also looking at alternatives as well. So I mean, they were mentioning other kind of products like, let's say, hydrogen fuel cells, etc. But that's a topic for another day, another day, and another discussion. But right now, this is the kind of thing that kind of excites us. Having those battery efficiencies increased, and also focusing on safety. So the BIS also in India has come out with standards which are specifically dealing with both the quality and the safety aspects of batteries, because they are the key components, as was mentioned by Neha as well, both in terms of cost and also in terms of enhancing the safety of the vehicles. So that is something, innovation on those kind of products is something that we are looking at right now. Other than that, there were points of, charging infrastructure, etc., and innovative ways of financing those as well, because I'm, if it is possible, we can also have that as part of the priority sector lending, charging infrastructure, building up charging infrastructure, so that funding can be easily accessed by such entities. And so that is another thing from a financing side that can be looked at. So these are a couple of points, where we can focus on and move forward on the EV space there.
Great points, Mayank. I really appreciate that you brought all those to the table. I think, Mayank, you also mentioned about charging infra, and that is where I guess Jyoti can also shed some light on different innovations. Jyoti, you see can happen in charging infrastructure. apart from the aggregator model, I mean, that is something which definitely companies are doing. But those innovations that can actually drive the growth in India, if I become more specific. So Jyoti, over to you.
Thank you, Sumedh, for that question. So, what we see essentially as charging goes forward, there are two kinds of charging. One is basically your home or destination charging, where you need a reliable and safe charger to or charging infrastructure to do your charging every day. And it can be at a lower pace, but it needs to be reliable enough that you can just come home and just like a smartphone, you can plug it right next to your bed or your PC, or and you can charge, and it always gives you basically enough power that the next morning you get up and you have 100% charged basically phone. So something like that you need for your own parking lot, wherever you are parking your vehicle. And the second is the fast charging network, which needs to be developed for intercity or in city also, some use cases, whether it is on fleets or whether it is for quick top up. Those are some of the two types of charging. So I think are already more or less done. The main basically constraint right now, if you ask me, is on the grid side also. So if you get a like for two-wheeler or three-wheeler, it doesn't matter probably, but for a four-wheeler, you do not have enough load in most of the houses across India to charge it at the peak charging rates, right? So with that in mind, we need to basically upgrade the grid infrastructure also and make sure that there is basically process which is defined also to make sure that these EV tariffs or something is easily accessible. So today, those are some of the things that
losing you. Maybe you can
know your, basically that how much time.
And then
hello.
Speaking. Jyoti, we are losing you. I think there is some latency. Maybe.
Okay, let me just turn off my video.
Yeah, please.
Hope this helps.
Yeah, we can hear you now.
Okay, so I was saying that the grid infrastructure also needs to be upgraded, and there has to be basically policy and process flows which has to be defined. Today, basically the policy says that 5 rupees is the EV tariff on getting charging points, but the amount of money and effort it takes for an end consumer basically negates the whole policy itself, because it takes you anywhere between 3 months to 6 months to get your systems and your connections upgraded also.
Okay.
Kind of ironing out has to happen. And on technology side, there is fast chargers which are getting introduced by us, and even ecosystem, it will keep going higher, but at the same time 99% of the use cases will be solved by basically reliable charging network, essentially, where
so that makes sense.
Charging your smartphone. I think we have.
Yeah, maybe because of the network, we are not able to hear you properly, but I can get what exactly you're trying to convey. And maybe one thing which perhaps India, because we are, a land of people who are constrained with patience. So if there is something like fast charger, something where people don't have to stand in queues, if some technology comes in that angle, perhaps a lot many things get resolved. So this is something my take on thing, which perhaps the innovation should happen. But anything, because you highlighted one important thing, and maybe Neha, Ned also is working on adequacy side. That I mean, for distribution systems, it is a once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, it's a kind of a new demand center for any utility. They have never thought about electrification of transport, and they becoming important piece. So, any specific pieces you can highlight, Neha and Ned, which you feel like are important and should be part of the entire piece of puzzle?
Sure. Thanks, Sumit, for that question. Actually, it's a very interesting topic, innovation and plus the new trends. So one thing that we truly believe is that, for the next wave of innovation, first of all, I really want to, appreciate the Indian startup ecosystem here because, in the last so many years, we have seen so many Indian startups coming up with innovative solutions. And as MG, we are also working very closely with the startups in these upcoming domain technology and EV space, especially to create this next level of disruption, I would say. As an example, like we run an annual flagship program, which is called MG Developer Program, where every year we invite startups, working across futuristic technologies and EV, and we work very closely with them to bring solutions in the market. Also, when it comes to charging, one very interesting thing about EV and the point I mentioned in the beginning as a lifestyle is that, most majority of the charging happens at home. So home charging plays a very, very important role when it comes to the adoption of EV. And secondly, like Jyoti also mentioned, highway charging, destination charging is important because that gives the confidence for the customers to take long distance travel in EVs, intercity travels, and that will make EVs, from a second car in the family to first car in the family. Also, I can share another innovative solution that we have launched last month itself. Also, is coming from an insight, because when it comes to charging infrastructure, there are obviously a lot of players who are building this infrastructure, and gladly we see that the trend of charging infrastructure and points are increasing. Again, one point that customers always feels the need was a consolidated, I would say, platform or an information where you can see all the network together. Because even today, when you want to spot or locate a charger, you have to, say, for example, download multiple apps, and then you identify the charger. So again, as an initiative, we introduced a unified charging platform, which is called eHub. So here we have partnered with all the major leading players in the country, and with the collective vision of solving this problem. So here, again, that gives a confidence that so much charging infrastructure is available nearby that can help you to even take long distance travel. So I think such innovative solutions and also collaboration with startups in this space will definitely help to bring new solutions and create disruptions in the market like India.
Great, great. Thank you so much, Neha. Edmund, do you have any reflections or thoughts that you would like to share?
Absolutely, yeah. I think that what Neha shared really captures very well sort of the innovation side of transformation. I'll maybe discuss a different side, which is gets more at the discom role in this transformation, which you had alluded to, how it really is an enormous opportunity for demand growth. But it's important that institutionally the discoms are in a position to benefit from that. And this gets into some more complicated questions about just overall discom reforms within India to strengthen their financial position and also to cut down on their losses. So ensuring that you have good metering infrastructure in order to make sure that discoms are able to monitor that demand effectively and capture that well. I think this is another incentive to advancing and strengthening the drive to install smart meters around the country, which has already made a lot of progress, but there's still further progress to be made on that. As in these kind of metering technologies are essential for long-term, more advanced uses of EVs as part of the grid, as mobile battery sources, essentially, for two-way charging capability, not just EVs drawing power from the grid, but also supplying power to the grid in times of grid strain. Continuing to strengthen, I think integrating this expansion drive for charging infrastructure with bigger questions of smart meter rollout, reduction of aggregate technical and commercial losses is an opportunity to advance the EV transition and tackle some of the difficult challenges that discoms face in putting themselves on a sound financial footing.
Great. No, I think excellent points captured by both Edmund, you and Neha. Thank you so much. And before I enter into the last segment, and that is the kind of a open panel discussion, I would like to encourage if there are any questions from audience, please write it into the Q&A chat box, and we'll be happy to take them in next 10 minutes. So I think I open the question for panel members. I mean, it is for all of you to respond and see if you have any reflections. So the question here is more about what are the top 2 strategies which comes into your mind that could be adopted for India's unique context and how and make us successful. So maybe all of you can please share your reflections. I think I will ask Mayank first of all to take the first bet on this.
Could you just read that once more? Sorry.
I was saying that Mayank, what are the top 2 strategies you think that could be adapted or adopted from other countries for India, or you think something which is unique for India and that can help us to advance and scale faster?
Yeah, sure. Like just first of all, one unique scenario here in India, and Neha also alluded to that, was the fact that it's a very two-wheeler, three-wheeler driven market. I mean, currently, right, the adoption of the smaller vehicles compared to the larger ones, and the larger ones, especially with respect to e-buses, etc., is where majority of that public-private partnership. And in India, we have this concept of smart cities as well. So the Ministry of Housing and Urban Development, how they can kind of come together and support that leg of the EV adoption. However, how the demand-linked incentives, demand-side incentives, and wider adoption of the smaller vehicles or two-wheelers and three-wheelers, how that can be done on the demand side. So these are two kind of different approaches that we have to follow here in India, which is unique to our situation. And also leading back to what Edmund, how I started off, and which I also mentioned, if we have to move from dependence on import of oil to independence, actually, having it manufacturing, having the entire ecosystem in India, which starts from cells, battery cells, to each and every component, because we do have that scale. We can do that. We have an established auto industry already. It's already moving towards moving from traditional or ICE vehicles to EVs. So it is possible. It's already been done. The government support is certainly there, so it is possible, and that's where that China model can be replicated here, where adoption is very well supported by the local manufacturing rather than just relying on imports of EVs. So that is something where I see our whole EV market going forward, both from a demand and supply side.
Okay, thank you. So maybe Nitish, over to you if you have any suggestions or inputs.
Sure. Thank you, Sumit. I think just a couple of recommendations there. I think I'll just pick up from where Neha left in terms of the innovation side. So I think both at the federal and the subnational level, there has been incentives for EV adoption and manufacturing. Could there be a program devised that incentivizes R&D investments into EVs, batteries, and charging infrastructure? Because ultimately, innovation is the key if you have to really set up yourself on the global roadmap when it comes to zero-emission vehicles, and not only drive it for India, but for the global markets. So I think is one, there could be a program that incentivizes private investments into the R&D, because currently our share as a gross expenditure as a percentage of GDP is less than 1% as compared to China, which is 2.4, US 3.5. So how do we really step up and incentivize R&D? And second is more a policy or a regulation that gives market certainty or a clarity, because once the market has that certainty, it can guide in where those dollars would flow in and how those economies of scale can help reduce those costs. So similar to what US, China has done, also give a clear regulatory approach that this is what we would be going forward, we would embrace as a regulation, and which can help OEMs plan their investments much more efficient and better. So I think currently, because there are some EV state says that we also subsidize hybrid cars. There are incentives for hybrid, there are incentives for hydrogen, and so on and so forth. I think that also sets a clear, a mixed kind of a signal to the market. So a clear signal to the market might help.
Great. Thank you so much, Nitish. I think I will just turn it to Jyoti. Jyoti, if you have any last minute thoughts, anything specific you would like to add here?
Yeah, sorry, just switching the devices so that you can hear me properly. Yeah, so I think the basically policy which has been on the EV side has to be much more focused to basically the suit the needs of vehicle, and how can the ecosystem be kind of provided so that the adoption can take place at a rapid pace. And I think the key to building that trust between the consumers is basically building the infrastructure out. And just like I think somebody mentioned that there is grid upgradation work which has to be done, and a lot of frameworks which has to be set on the grid side as well, because these EVs will not only consume energy, they will also be able to store energy. And I think with the government focusing on solar and renewable resources at rooftops, this becomes imperative sooner than later, that they kind of think of EV along with the grid essentially, because that would drive not only the cost down for the consumers for upgrading the grid infrastructure, but also provide government with a completely decentralized and new kind of grid, which will be not only renewable in terms of generating the energy, but also consuming that energy and storing that energy. I think if the policy framework is thought as a holistic approach on that lines, I think it will benefit not only the transition in mobility space, but also the energy space to a very large extent. And I think the government is taking steps in that direction, but I think the policy framework and mandates are set out clearly, like some of the panelists here have mentioned, that there is the deadline or something like that. So I think that would kind of propel EVs much faster and naturally through organic demand. Thank you. Thank you, Sumit.
Thank you so much. I think Neha and Ned, I just kept you in the last because I know you have that global experience, which you can definitely bring as a strategy which India can at least look into and take forward. So Neha, maybe first if you can comment and then to Ned.
So I think most of the points are already covered, by the fellow panelists. I just want to close my part with one line, is that when it comes to EV, I think it is the right time when we see that EVs, we always think that EVs are future, but I would say EV is present. We see how much we are footing the import bills on the crude oil. We see how pollution is a real-time problem in majority of the cities. And I see EVs as a very comprehensive, or in fact, I would say a very holistic solution on lot of parameters. Even technology wise, we see that EVs today are, already smart. They are in terms of convenience, in terms of technology, in terms of features, they are already much ahead of the vehicles which are available in the market. So from a customer convenience perspective, from a technology perspective, EVs offer additional, I would say, convenience. Energy perspective, like Mayank rightly said, we need energy atmanirbharta. And EVs provide a lot of, I would say, ways to be build that independence, because with solutions like PM Solar Yojana, and with other demand incentives, it will make use of more and more renewable energy also useful. So in a nutshell, I would say that EV not only provide economic, but I would say social, health, environmental, technology wise, lot of benefits. And that is why I would say the time of EV has come today, and we don't even need to wait for the future to shift to EVs.
Yeah, so that is an excellent point. So I think Over to you, Ned, before we open the floor for any participant to ask any questions.
Yeah, I think I'll put out a sort of a bit of an unorthodox suggestion, perhaps, but this is also based on China's EV story. Again, China not just the EV leader in the bus side, but also in the manufacturing and the deployment side. China's motivations in adopting EVs are very similar to India's in many ways. Also a highly oil-dependent country that's looking to take advantage of a new emerging sector to both address air pollution challenges and for industrial growth of its own. And the very interesting aspect about that is that their success in that reflected a combination of both effective indigenous innovation, but also in smart bringing in of FDI. So particularly in their engagement with Tesla, they relied heavily upon Tesla's investments as a way to bring advanced technologies into China and then to develop a manufacturing industry around Tesla that then became the basis for the development of a number of, or the commercialization, the effective development of a number of advanced EV manufacturers themselves, to the point that now Tesla, having sort of initially enjoyed great benefits in the Chinese market, strong market, now they're having some challenges in maintaining that because of how strong China's manufacturers are as well. I think that this might be a potentially replicable strategy for India in thinking about engagement with Chinese manufacturers, companies like BYD that are developed, that are, you know, at this point really on the leading edge of global EV manufacturing, much stronger than European manufacturers and Japanese manufacturers for sure, in terms of the quality of software integration, and sort of, because these are fundamentally companies that are EV manufacturers rather than ICE manufacturers becoming EV manufacturers. They start with an EV-based mindset. And, you know, in the same way as the goal of China was never to ultimately be an importer and a dependent upon foreign investment, but they knew that there were advantages in relying in the early stages upon that in a smart way. This is something that I think India can replicate as well, with smart courting of Chinese investment through JVs perhaps, or other kinds of approaches in the battery or in the production sector, with long-term, and then building a domestic supply industry around that can support the flourishing of already EV companies, particularly in the four-wheeler space. You know, two-wheelers are already sort of much more developed within India, but the four-wheeler space and the EV coach and bus space that are in their earlier stages.
Excellent point, Neds. I really appreciate you brought all these points, and this was very helpful to this entire session. So with that, I open the floor for questions from audience, and I would request my colleague, Dr. Vikas, who have actually orchestrated the entire show today, sitting silently beside me to moderate the session. If you have any questions, Vikas, from participants.
Yeah, thank you, Sumit, for the introduction. So, like, we have one question for Ed. So, Ed, like, India, like, many people are very much concerned about safety. So they have asked, like, can you share like how China has tackled the safety issues while transitioning to ICE to EV, and like what could be the strategies for the Indian government and state agencies?
That's an excellent question. I feel like, in truth, I don't know the answer well enough to give a good one. So I'm going to have to put up my hands and say, unfortunately, I hope someone else can find the answer for that.
Yeah, like, may I request, like, if any of the panelists want to answer, like, what strategies that Indian government should look forward to improve the safety concerns in the e-mobility space? Yeah, Nitish, if you have something, maybe from your pilot, or like maybe from your prior experience, or maybe Jyoti, like you are in this charging and battery space. So if you can share some of your experience.
So I have some experience, at least, in working with China. So what I have seen evolve over the years is something I can tell. So we have been actually working in China from 2017 to 20. After COVID, we kind of tweaked the entire business model and kind of pivoted and focused on Indian market only. So what we have seen in the last 5-7 years is that there were very strict standards essentially for vehicles which were defined, and a lot of investment in testing and certification labs, which has happened from 2017 to 2023 till last year when I went there. Essentially, it was not before basically 2017, it was very easy to get assemble a vehicle there. Now it is limited, and you need a lot of certifications to be done. Thankfully, India has also followed on that path, essentially. And the second step essentially is more related to the charging infrastructure, where they have now mandated safety guidelines for all the apartments build in their building codes, which are enforced strictly, so that basically EV charging points are first set up, as well as they're maintained over time, essentially, right? And there is a lot of standards that you cannot like in case of India. I think a lot of OEMs, at least the CKD, the ones who are taking CKD route, were saying that you can take the battery away and charge at home. That has been completely banned. You cannot basically take the battery home and charge anymore, even if the battery is very portable. There is a standardized zone in every apartment, in every building you enter in China. You would find that only vehicles would be charging at that place, and there is dedicated zones with for two-wheelers, for four-wheelers, which are present in those apartments and complexes where they have to be charged. No matter what is the size of the battery of a vehicle, at least you cannot take that home and basically detach it and charge at any location. And basically, those are some of the safety mandates I have seen develop from ground, essentially. And working with the Chinese ecosystem also, we have seen that the regulations have also become much stricter, and in terms of qualifying and basically standardizing these products, both on the battery as well as on the charging front in China.
Yeah, great. Thanks for your insights on this. So I have like another question. So the market of electric three-wheelers is like mostly popular in the lower middle class who earn from these three-wheelers, right? So the question is like how they can enhance the battery life or their electric three-wheeler, because this is like one of the major component that everybody sees, like it has a like certain cost. So how they can extend the battery life, battery usage to make it more sustainable, not only for that person but also for the environment as well. So like any thoughts from your side, side? Yeah, maybe Jyoti, like because you are in this space, so maybe first I would like to like have your thoughts on the table, and then maybe we'll go to the other.
Okay. Thanks for asking again, but I think what I think is okay. Let me take a stab at answering that. So, I think what has happened in two-wheeler is starting to happen on the three-wheeler front also. We are migrating from unorganized players to organized players in the three-wheeler space as we speak. There are recent launches by Bajaj, Mahindra, and other market leaders, essentially including some startups which have launched their own products, which are certified at a much higher level, and with respect to the fire safety as well as range and everything else, as per ARAI, which is the Indian standards. So I think with them entering the market already and extending their product range, we'll see consolidation in that space also, which will definitely bring in some amount of safety and basically battery recycling challenges will be fixed, because they would offer a centralized supply chain and distribution mechanism with standardized products across, which will sell in volumes. So I think the reverse logistics could also be figured out over time as they scale, which was not the case till now with most of the unorganized players in the three-wheeler space. And I think the brands and both traditional and startup alike coming into the space would definitely improve the product quality, make their life longer and make them last longer also. So that would address the battery longevity question as well as the expected use. And if you are able to use your vehicle for 5 years more in a three-wheeler space, like people do their Bajaj and their TVS or their Piaggio's CNG auto rickshaws today. You can probably remove, not make one vehicle also, right? So that is what we would see extending across the three-wheeler basically portfolio also, which would be, I think, a migration from the fragmented players of today, but at least would be good in the longer term is what we feel.
Yeah, great thoughts, Jyoti. Like I would like to move to the other panelists, like if they have something to say. Yeah, Nitish, would you like to say something on this, or like we'll go to the other question?
Sure.
So,
I think
yeah, please.
responding to both your previous question as well, I think India has moved, setting up by moving some robust regulations, both on the battery safety front, right? It's IP67, IP68. So I think these are some of the very robust regulations industry wide. However, I think some of the regulations where India can learn from China, what I also hear from Jyoti was that here there is still a possibility of taking out the battery and getting charged somewhere else. So you just take it out, and some of the very crude way in where battery swapping is also happening. So although there are players which are operating in a much more organized manner, but in parts of Delhi we see that people also swapping it or operating in a much more unorganized fashion. So I think there needs to be more of a stringent regulations primarily on that. In terms of the three-wheeler, I think I completely echo that this market segment is really, really price sensitive, and you really need to get a kind of a best kind of a value proposition or a value for money for them, so as for them to consider the switch to electric. All the OEMs have been offering buyback guarantees, but I think still the upfront cost is such a big difference for them that they are finding it hard to transit. And I think another possibly regulatory intervention, not from a technology side, that I would like to point there is the permit regulations. So often for passenger auto rickshaws, the permits have been acquired in a secondary market at an inflated prices, and at a point when there are no permits for three-wheelers, they find it hard to surrender it at possibly zero cost or nothing in return. So, and that's another reason why these players do not even come forward for either switching to electric or even retrofitting their current autos.
Yeah, great, Nitish. Thanks a lot. So definitely I'll echo with like all your thoughts, and also adding to that. So one of the critical point while we see for the longevity of the battery, so we need to keep our battery healthy and maintained. So I think like there's some kind of like short training program should be organized for these consumers, so they can take care of their battery health. Like they know like when to charge, when not to charge, especially, and so that they don't they don't feel the battery abusing. So this is like one point I would like to add. And like moving to the other one, like if we have any kind of questions, maybe I think. So I think like we are like done with all the questions that we have from the audience, and this is like something nice that came out of the discussion. Now I would like to hand over to Sumit.
Thank you so much.
To conclude. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you so much, because I think 4-5 points have emerged out very clearly. One is that we have to actually develop the indigenous market of manufacturing. That capability has to develop. Second is strong supply chain testing and standards and regulations which are followed. I mean, that is clear a voice which has emerged from this discussion. Incentivizing R&D so that we can actually build some strong cases in-house and deploy it ASAP. Customer preferences, making the market equitable and inclusive is something which Nitish highlighted. I do echo that sentiments as well. And finally, that message which Neha resonated really well was that EV are not just a choice, but a vital component of a sustainable future. So it is the present rather than the future. So we should all go with that. So with that, I really thank all my panel members who have joined today, taking out time to share their insights, all the attendees who actually have spent so much wonderful time. We had 65 participants who participated and also asking very wonderful questions. And to my colleagues, Vikas, who anchored the entire show, Anushka for her participation and making it possible. So thank you again, all of you. I really admire your time today and happy EV Day once again. So with that, I conclude the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, everyone.